little after 9. As soon as we're, are you ready?
Throw something at Dennis. You think you could hit Dennis with your gavel from here?
Morning, Mitch.
No.
The dream.
Come on, you gotta be
I could try.
quicker than that.
I don't think I could though. I gave it
You gotta
some
start
time.
It should be, yeah. Yeah, with this heat and everything. I wouldn't know. You'd have to talk to Pearlie. You'd have to talk to a public employee to talk about it. No, they have, no. No, hopefully I think they've had a lot of play and stuff. I mean, it's been a good year for them. The greens have been good. But the golf course itself looked bad, so.
I'll make a statement for everybody a little later on. I don't know.
Yeah.
I may take this all off another few weeks. I just want to see
Hey,
what it
listen,
looks like.
while we're waiting, I met with, this guy, he's a friend of a client of mine's, battalion chief for the, aviation, the helicopters for CAL FIRE. And he was asking me,
Call the meeting to order and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item B on our agenda, public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized item. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration.
Gotta do roll call.
No action can be taken on these matters not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 5 minutes per person.
Scotty.
And before we finish or ask for a public comment, Mona, can you take roll call, please?
Yes, Director Davidson?
here?
Director Stump?
Present?
President Ratterman?
Here.
Director Dean?
Here.
And Director Dooley?
Here.
Do we have any public comment? Seeing none, move to the item 3 consent agenda. The following items are expected to be routine, non-controversial. Items will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member may request that any item be removed for latter discussion.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second for approval. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Old business. Item 4A, discussion regarding the review of district rules and regulations governing the furnishing of water and/or wastewater services policy, meter sizing, and residential fire suppression systems. Mr. Stump.
I brought this to the board in order to have a point of discussion. I'm crystal clear on the process. I understand how it all works, but after being asked by several of the contractors in the Ebbets Pass area, I did do a little bit of investigation in terms of the manufacturers that are supplying them with their fire sprinkler systems. They indicated, the California engineer indicated that it was impossible to have a 5/8 meter provide, under California rules, provide service, and in fact it would be a minimum of a 3/4 meter. Now, I have zero problem with it as far as I'm concerned. If the engineer says it has to be a 1-inch meter, that's okay. But my questions, and the reason I wanted to have the discussion, was if that is true, and all I know is this is from the manufacturer's engineers, if this is true, then ultimately we will be having almost no 5/8 meters into the future with all new construction. If that is the case, then I'm curious in terms of, I need to understand how we develop the master plans and how we figure out connection fees. Are they based on 95% of our our new construction being 5/8 meters, or is it 3/4 meters, or is there some kind of a formula that is being used in order to develop our future water needs? And is it based on meter size? So I wanted to have the discussion to see how this works, because I don't fully understand it. And in my mind, it may turn into a policy concept. If this is the case, do we even need 5/8 meters any longer? Or do we base everything off of a 3/4 from now into the future? I really think that what's going to be happening in terms of people conserving water, that 5/8 is going to be more than enough for us as the primary meter, but I have no concept in terms of how that could change just by virtue of having that additional flow requirement for the fire systems. So it's convoluted to me in terms of what our policy might be into the future regarding whether 5/8 is how we calculate things into our connection fees, or is 3/4 the way we go. I just wanted the full board to be able to look at this in terms of how we look at standards and how we look at how we develop our connection fees and our master plans. And I expect Bill has stuff to say about that. I know Mitch has information for us on this, but I wanted it to be a full board discussion so that everybody would understand where I'm going with it. Mitch?
It's not true.
Okay.
The vendor you spoke with is not a registered professional engineer in the state of California. He represents a particular vendor and a particular system. We currently have 5/8" meters being installed with inline sprinkler systems today. We just got more that will be ordered here shortly. Regardless of that, you're going to have 5/8" meters into your future for a long, long time, because the bulk of your system currently has that. For those systems, there's also the option of a T at the beginning, where the consumptive use is going to be metered, and the fire system is also independently metered with a fire detector check. That's already part of your standard and part of what you did in 2011 to adjust for that. So you have a mechanism for those folks that would like to have the smaller meter for their consumptive piece without having to pick up the large capacity size. And the mechanism is there for them to pay the 5/8 capacity for that larger demand associated with the sprinkler system. So that's already part of your as passed. So the idea that having a inline fire sprinkler system by this particular vendor doesn't meet the standards is just woefully inaccurate. You'll see that the materials that we provide regularly by the Home Fire Sprinkler Coalition, as well as by other fire sprinkler systems, they all indicate that 5/8" meters can satisfy a general fire suppression system for residential houses. Part of it is, it's no different than, it increases your number of fixtures. So if you have a 4-bathroom house, you're going to need more fixtures. And you'll have more fixtures, as a result, your fixture count may drive the difference of a meter size too. So it is quite possible that somebody that's building a home that has a fire sprinkler system will be driven to the next size of meter if they choose to go with an inline sprinkler system as opposed to teeing it off for an independent sprinkler system. There's lots of options on how they lay these out. There's other options for having a dry system or having a pump system. So it's a wide variety of options is there for the consumer's choice. When it comes to building your capacity fee, your capacity fees are going to be based on the total demand of that system. And ultimately, if you see larger size meters becoming more and more common, that's going to have to be reflected in your infrastructure, because a 1" meter doesn't know that it's only going to behave like a 3/4 or 5/8" meter. So every time it comes on, it's going to perform just like a 1" meter, regardless of what it's supposed to do. So ultimately, those will be reflected in your peak demand moments, and those eventually will be carried out in capacity suites. So the system is self-correcting regardless of how that plays out. Bill, did you want to add any more to that?
I actually called the engineer you're referring to. She's not registered in the state of California, she's from Minnesota. She represents a manufacturer, and by California regulations, particularly in this county, you need a C16 contractor, and they're not C16 contractors. But she admitted even the system that she puts in goes down to 9 gallons per minute. And there's enough, and the other thing she admitted too is we have something called Bernoulli's equation, which I keep bringing up. We have higher pressures up here than anybody else. So in fact, if somebody actually measured how much flow, you'd probably get more than 20 gallons a minute from the meter here. But I did talk to the lady. She admitted she's not a California engineer, and she isn't a C16 contractor, which is required to get a building permit around here. So, but the 5/8 inch meters, we got a whole bunch of them going in down South Peak right now. He's got 6 houses, and as soon as you guys pass my agenda, I'm going to have 23 more. Every one of them is 5/8 inches, have absolutely no problem. He's a local C16 contractor that fires it up, and that's kind of the situation.
Do they have independent tanks?
No.
One of,
There is one guy at the bottom, it wasn't Castle Cook. Castle Cook is just putting in a couple additional sprinkles all they're doing.
In line.
Well, I mean, I'm building a house right now, and the issue was, it was in Rancho Calaveras. The original bid was $4,800, and, you know, that was for your basic inline system. And then, you know, he came out and did a meter test, and he said, well, you know, you're gonna be required to put a tank in. That's another $4,800. So while there are options, you know, I think that this, we need to have a little further investigation in this, because I'm not interested in, is it possible? I mean, I'm interested in how much does it cost the homeowner to do, and if we can offset that, because, I mean, my opinion is meters don't react at all. People react, and they generally react to their water bill, and I can't imagine me consuming more water if I had a 3/4 inch meter as opposed to a 5/8 meter. I think it's immaterial, the meter size. You know, if it's a residential application, it's a residential application. You know, we have 2.4 people on average in a house. They're gonna consume as much water as, I believe, everybody else, and the fire sprinklers will probably never go off in their lifetime. So it's not, they're not a consumer of water at all. But if we could make a small change, and I realize that we'd have to change our whole cost for capacity, because I don't believe changing the meter size, particularly in what the newer homes are going to be, which are smaller lots and probably smaller homes, is going to increase our potential usage and therefore require additional capacity. You know, a 3/4 inch meter on a residential 1/4 acre lot, I believe is going to use the same amount of water as a 5/8 meter on a residential 1/4 acre lot. So I know we'd have to change that structure, but I'd like to continue to investigate this as opposed to just saying, well, it's possible to, you can always accommodate it with a 5/8 meter. You can accommodate a fire sprinkler system on a crappy well. You just got to build an expensive tank. And in the case of the homeowner that I'm building the house for, it cost her another $5,000. And if we could have switched out the meter to a 3/4 meter, maybe she wouldn't have been required to have the tank system, which is, you know, is not, there's no way those are as reliable as just directly hooked up to the public water system, because they're mechanical and they have a tendency to, you know, I mean, if the battery's dead, if the power goes out, we all know what happens in a fire. You know, I think that those tanks are really going to be found to be inefficient if power goes out and if they're not maintained properly. And I'm not aware that there is any sort of a maintenance schedule on these tanks that are, you know, and it's just a 500-gallon tank. It's, you know, there's nothing special about it. I mean, it just sits off the side. It's probably better to have them covered. They're not required to be covered, but it's a mechanical device that is separate but connected to our system that people are going to expect to be reliable. And I just think, you know, I mean, I think it would be a better public service if we could come up with a way for people who are required to do sprinklers to, if needed, and I'm not saying it has to happen every time, but if needed, that we would upsize their meter for whatever it costs to upsize their meter, and that would be it.
Director Davidson, actually, the premise there that a 5/8 inch meter or a residential meter on a 5/8, same lots, different size meter, would not have the same use is not correct. And it's an important finding because your rate system is based upon the finding that you have a proportional assignment of costs to those meters already. And that finding was based on the fact that 3/4 inch meters are going to produce a higher utilization, and we even have a higher allotment in that base rate as a result.
Aren't we in the water selling business?
We are in the water service delivery business, and it's a little different model than just simply selling water. And so ultimately, it's about recovering the costs for the infrastructure and the level of service is proportionate to the services being delivered.
I just will never, I will never get my head around a family using more water because they have a bigger meter. It makes no sense to me. I mean, our whole water conservation is not, when we decided to go into water conservation, why didn't we switch them all out to half-inch meters?
Many agencies are going to smaller and smaller meters because it will reflect the demands that are appropriate. One of the things that happens when you have meters that are too large for your usage is you end up with increased unaccounted for water or non-revenue water because the larger meters tend to have more slippage on the smaller end of the scale, so you'll end up with that type of factor also.
What is slippage? I guess I don't know what that means.
Slippage is just the unregistered water that passes through a meter, because again, water meters aren't meant to be this absolute precision device. The mechanism of a water meter is more about cost allocation through your system, and the factor of error, the reliability of a water meter on day one is never that precise. It's not as if they're calibrated. It's not like there's an annual certification, weights and means, and that type of thing don't happen. It's common to see water meters 5, 7, 10% out. And that's where systems that are more dependent upon fixed rate charges as opposed to reading the meters or the meter cost, it becomes that fine line you start to walk with the assumptions that you made that become the underpinnings of your rate structure. So in our case, 88% of our revenue comes to those fixed charges based upon the assumptions of water uses assigned to a property type based upon the meter size.
And the rest is consumption, right?
12% is consumption.
One of the things that we're not talking about that I've seen in this literature is the pipe size between the meter and the house. And by increasing it, it solves more problems. Is that true?
You know, one of the things, that even everybody has to admit, we have higher pressures than anybody else does, okay? Most of the people, and this is why I'm kind of surprised that somebody told you for a taker, because if you actually go and do a flow test on those meters, you're gonna get a lot more water than 20 GPM. Just so happens that the manufacturer stamps 20. But if you had your C16 go out there and actually do a flow test, and I talked to Ira from Cisco about doing this too. I said, why don't you just do a flow test on it and stuff? And I guess, I don't know if he's gonna charge them or whatever, but when you're dealing with 100 PSI of pressure versus 40, most of these things are based on 40 PSI. We're dealing with 100.
Right, but if you have that limiting factor, and this was talked about the last go around, and I'm curious as to what the law requires from these engineers to, I mean, typically, engineer things conservatively. If there's a limiting factor of 20 pounds stamped on the meter, doesn't matter what the flow test says, their calculation, I would imagine, their liability would say, it's like me saying, well, I believe that beam can hold, it's always held in the past, but in the book, it may not be big enough. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna put the beam that's big enough, to cover my butt. And so is that happening, or do we know for sure that meter size is not the limiting factor?
Conversations with Cisco, I know for a fact that they are willing to do flow testing. And we understand that the meters are rated 20. In fact, I even called the manufacturer of the meters to ask them, why are you guys rating these meters? I told them what the pressures are here. They agreed that we get way more water than the 20 GPM, but they won't change it because we're not a standard system. We're not like the flatlands where you're getting 40 or 60 PSI. We're 100 PSI. With Cisco,
Not always. We're not always 100.
Oh, I know.
I mean,
We're usually way above what a normal city has. I mean, because we're in the foothills. But basically, he said was they would do flow testing and it would be okay, and that's what they got. And that's really, the pressure actually makes a big difference.
I talked to the meter manufacturers, and they acknowledge the fact that it'll flow a bunch more, but they rate them based on accuracy. If they're no longer accurate when you're pushing twice as much water through the meter, and they recognize that. But I knew that this was the direction that the meeting was going to go into, but my concern is, how do we calculate what's actually occurring out there? We look at a 5/8 meter and we say, we've got 10,000 5/8 meters in this area, and so our master plan says that with this much water, we're going to be able to do this much. And is with a 3/4, that's going to change. I don't understand how we're planning for the future based on this, the additional 3/4. If whatever decisions get made and all of a sudden, we don't have any more 5/8, everybody is required to do 3/4. Now as our master plan's being developed for 10,000 3/4-inch meters, that's not flowing any more than an actual 5/8 meter. I don't understand the process that we're doing in terms of our long-range planning. That's the reason I'm curious about it.
There's many factors that go into when you lay out a model for your future water projections, and ultimately those size of meters, the number of people per household, your irrigable space, your types of demographics, the permeability of your soils, the kinds of landscaping, all are taken back in and projected forward, and those all weigh into a model. Again, we're installing 5/8-inch meters today. That's what's going on. There's nothing to indicate that 3/4-inch meters are going to become a norm, and there's absolutely nothing that precludes someone from having a 5/8-inch meter for the consumption side, and then the separate fire protection side with a fire detector check with that capacity assigned for it. That's the way your ordinance is currently set up as another option. And as a result, anyone that would have a 5/8-inch meter today, would we automatically upsize them because they requested it?
Perhaps. But, I'm curious, you just brought that up. We know what our rules are, or generally we do, but does the building department know?
But, the funny thing is, Jeff, we went over to the building department, we brought these brochures with them, and they were supposed to pass them on the counter. The last time I went over there, I didn't see them on the counter.
Well, that's something we can fix easily, is make sure that the building department has a copy of our code and the possibilities, at least in the short term, because I don't know that they do.
They do.
They do.
And they, as somebody who just applied for a building permit and received one, I didn't get anything. And in fact, they actually, they required us to get two separate permits, one for the fire sprinklers and one for the, so I'm wondering if they're being proactive about that.
I think they're saying come over here, is what they're saying, but we brought them over.
Well, I'll call Jeff and ask him about
I
that.
talked to Jeff, and I also brought a bunch of stuff over there too, and there was some discussions that took place in the building department, and this is kind of why we brought them over a bunch of information, but we'll see, but we can go over there and talk to them again, but, it's a C16's call, if they say that it's okay, it's okay.
Well, but every district has a different standard. There is no uniform standard in the state. And I remember this thing came down, it was a big surprise to us. I mean, I think we were being told in December that this rule was going to come down and was going to get adopted, and we were just standing there, what? What does that mean to us? Whenever it was enacted. I remember the discussions.
Well, I was a building official in a county in 2005, and again, this was very much on the building official's radar as what was changing.
We don't have any building officials in this department. We're the water district.
Bob, you have something?
Yeah, I do. Question,
I'm just saying, we weren't.
I think we're going around and around about something we have absolutely no control over, and I'm wondering, I doubt seriously if this is the only conversation taking place about this issue in California with water districts, and I'm wondering if we ought to kick it upstairs ask Aqua to take it on
I would
and get some clarification?
Aqua's certainly not the place to take on a technical issue of this nature, but more importantly, this one has been resolved in most places already. That's what's so perplexing to me, is that we see a builder who is doing a lot of building here, who's moving through it seamlessly, yet we seem to keep stubbing our toe on something because we don't want to let it just follow a natural course.
Well, then maybe what we need to do is tell these manufacturers' reps is to get their position in line with current policy and regulations.
As you've dealt with anybody that is marketing product, ultimately, they're going to tell their side of the story as opposed to necessarily figuring out another way.
Well, they can tell their side of the story, but if there are already regulations in place, then it would seem to me that they ought to be familiar with them.
Well,
Well, when they don't hire an engineer that's registered in your state, it's pretty telling.
I appreciate the conversation. I still have to ask, and maybe this is a part of a study session. We base our policy based on what we expect the future to be in terms of build out and issues of water usage and things like that. I don't understand that process. I mean, you guys will come to us and you'll say, we just redid our master plan for Ebbets Pass, and I go, cool. I don't know what that means. I don't know I don't know the process. It's a black box to Don. So I'm voting, oh, we got a new master plan, great, here. Yes, that sounds good. I'm just trying to be educated enough that I'm hopefully making good decisions for the board members that come after me in terms of what our actual needs are going to be into the future. I don't know what the master plan entails, what gets measured, what doesn't get measured. Is it tied directly to the general plan? Is it tied directly to how many lots are available? I'm kind of lost in this process. I realize we pay people to do this for us, and we pay them good money, and I suspect they're very good at it, but I really don't know what they're looking at.
well, I think at the very least, we need to maybe, kick this around a little bit more, because I think if nothing else, there's, what we can provide is more clarity for people that are doing this work. It is gonna be, just because it's not a big issue now, the only reason it's not is because we're gonna build 20 houses in Calaveras County this year. Maybe 40 if we're lucky, which will be 40 times what we built last year. But pretty soon it'll be 400. And then maybe 1,200.
23.
What's that?
I said, as soon as you approve my item, it's going to be 23.
Yeah, I've never seen an agenda item yet that built a house. It usually takes financing and demand,
Man, it's so reasonable there. But you know something, Jeff, we've been talking to some of the people, the contractors that's come in. We've passed them out the information, explained the stuff, and they haven't come back. So I'm assuming that whoever we're talking to.
Well, but they're also, because there are options, some of them are expensive options, and I'm not willing just to say, you know what, screw the people out there of this county, they can pay another $5,000. That $5,000 makes that house affordable or not affordable. I don't want to be an agency that just says, screw it, it's a regulation, we really don't care, we didn't cause it, why should we care? I don't want to be that kind of agency. I want to be the kind of agency that says, look, let's try to give these guys as many possible options and make it affordable, because we want more customers. Every time it's $5,000 for this and $5,000 for that, if you go, all the new fire code and everything, I think the new compliance on this house, because that I'm building, it had burned down. The new compliance issues with the no flammable products on the eaves, no eave vents, fire sprinklers, was in the neighborhood of $18,000. Just for the new compliance issues, and I don't want to just say, well, that doesn't matter to us. I want to come up with as much information. Do we have anything on our website about, the new fire code, how we're responding to that? Do we have a place where if somebody was looking to build a new house, that would stick out at them?
Director Davidson, I hear your concerns and appreciate it. We can go that direction, but and we'll improve perhaps the clarity, which was the point in the direction of the board is saying get these to the building department. But we also have the existing ratepayers that we have to look out for.
That's,
And expending money in order to put them to a disadvantage is not where we want to be either.
the person I'm building this house for has been a ratepayer for 30 years.
Well, on this subject, and I want to move this meeting along a little bit, and I don't know Bob has something to say. We've brought this subject up before, and I thought that the resolution what we decided to do is to have this information that was important to builders available at our front desk, on our website, and we'd provide it to the county. And I knew we took this up in the finance meeting, and we were in here in front of in a full board meeting. I know there was a couple board members missing or absent that day.
In the engineering committee, I.
Okay. And the engineering committee took it up already. Is that not, is it on our website, the information,
Yes.
and at our front desk,
Yes.
and with the county?
What's that there? That's our pamphlet
Okay.
that you're waving?
These are pamphlets that we purchased in order to distribute. They're prepared for package that were already presented.
But they don't have, our code in there regarding fire code.
Our code doesn't relate to the fire code other than giving them the option of a fire detector check. And again, that option is spelled out in these books too, because it's a common option.
I got it.
Has a bunch of these too, 'cause I personally
Go ahead.
Bob?
Yeah, with reference to what Jeff said, I think we are an agency that pays attention to the needs of the people, because I thought this issue was settled, as Scott mentioned, some time ago, when we decided that there was sufficient capacity with currently available meters to maintain a 5/8 meter. And if the issue of a tank is one to be able to produce fire flows, that's a county issue, it's not ours. They're the ones that put the ordinance in place for a tank. And I know because I had to put one in, and I decided to put in a 4,000-gallon tank because it just made a lot of sense to have more rather than less. I agree with Jeff.
You've got your tanks mixed up. Which the county will either charge you $900 for a fire fee, or you can put in a tank that is not connected to your house. It has nothing to do with, those are completely separate things. Now it's mandatory that you have a hot sprinkler system in your house, just like what you see.
I understand that part of it, but I mean, the fact is that if I'm not mistaken, it is a county ordinance rather than CCWD ordinance.
They're separate, Bob. This is a state ordinance we're talking about
Okay,
right
fine,
now.
all right, fine. But the point I'm getting at is that, I think we do have the interests of the public in mind when we do these things. And I guess the only way we can continue this process is whenever somebody comes in to make a sales pitch for their meters, is to point them in the direction of the proper regulations and let them, modify their sales pitch to address those. Are we going to be setting up at this Home and Garden Show?
Yes.
We are. Is it possible to put together a one-page summary of these issues with regard to, fire systems, so that anybody coming by, whether they're building, whether they want to retrofit, or whether they're thinking about building, can have this information? I think, it's just really a question and an issue of outreach more than anything else. But I really think that the people who come around trying to peddle these things need to be put in their place, and they need to be done. It needs to be done pretty quickly. They need to know that there are compliance issues that they can address. That's all I have.
Dennis?
I'm not sure now what they require in pipe size between the meter in the house and the main trunk lines. I remember seeing a lot of builders put in half-inch line, which was usually borderline at best. Do they now require three-quarter or even larger pipes for long runs?
The building department?
Yeah.
I don't know what they require.
If you had a sprinkler system, the C16 contractor would size that line because he could take into consideration the line loss going for that longer line. But for a standard home, the building department would not necessarily have looked at that, because if you've got your fixture count for two and a half bathrooms and a kitchen, your line loss to serve things that come off a 3/8-inch line isn't going to be impacted even if you had a half-inch line. But for sprinkler systems, which is a requirement for all future housing, your C16 is going to have to certify that, which means they're going to look at those line losses.
Okay, well, my point is, if somebody's putting in a house and they can qualify for 3/4, which would increase the flow quite a bit between the house and the meter, over a ½ inch, or even an inch pipe, that's going to increase the flow even further, but you're only talking about a couple $100 more per house instead of $4,000.
Generally, the service pipe line to your home is at least one size larger than your meter size. It's just a rule of thumb as it plays out. So that.
Yeah, we've always put an 1.25 inch line to whatever house we're going to. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't even think it's a couple $100, the difference is immaterial. Where's this information on our website? I'm on it now.
I don't have it off the top of my head, but we put it on the website, we have a link to it, so we can bring it back up to a link.
Okay, let's move on. I think we beat this up pretty good.
Well, I want to just kind of reserve a spot, as this comes forward. I think it's going to be a bigger issue. We definitely need to get more information out there. I think we've all said that we'd like to see more information. I can't find it here. I'm sure it's here. I can't find anything that jumps out at me. Just maybe we can make contact again with the building department to make sure they understand what we allow. And then we'll see what progresses as far as our public information, because I think that's the biggest issue. We got board members that don't even know what's going on, and nor would they, because there is not a great demand right now for this, but we're talking about the difference between $5,000 per house and $10,000 per house, and I think that's worth trying to make sure that we make it clear to everybody what's possible, and so I just want to make sure we're headed in that direction, and if not, we'll readdress it at the engineering committee or something like
One of
that.
the things we spent a bunch of time looking at this was to make sure that people weren't spending a whole bunch of money for nothing. That's kind of why we did a little bit of research. To be honest, I don't want anybody to pay extra $5,000 or something, they don't have to either, but, you know what I mean? But we did spend a lot of time on this, and in about 2 seconds, 23 more houses are put, couldn't be equipped with a 5/8 inch meter, and now we need all the sprinklers. So.
Well, one last thing on this subject before we move on. What we've decided already is to have this information available at the counter, on the website, and to the county. And if we could just make sure, or can we follow up and just make sure that it's visible on our website?
We'll double check on the website,
Okay.
but we had it there when it was a contemporary issue a few weeks ago, I thought, and then ultimately, Mr. Burley delivered these to the county, and they are at the front counter because we just picked them up here as it came in.
Okay. Well, and I think that's, disseminating our position and getting it out there. Let's move on. New business. 5A, discussion, action approving the acceptance of transfer of Unit 6 Saddle Creek Development's water and wastewater service facilities, and rescind CCWD's agreement to operate and maintain the Hawk Ridge Road water pipeline within Saddle Creek 6. Mr. Bill Purley.
Inspected them, they're ready to go, we're going to buy 23 houses, so everything's been brought up to standards down there, and keeping to death several times, and brand new pump station, brand new sewer line, brand new force main, and Dave Haley is ready, wants to build 23 houses.
We probably go back a little bit with history. This was not your conventional standard progression. This was one that had been put in and had been partially accepted by the district, returned to the vendor, which is why you have this other agreement that still has to be rescinded as part of this action. But ultimately, at this point, they went in and totally refurbished everything that they had out there in order to bring it up to speed to meet Bill's standards for operation. And he's recommended we accept it. So with acceptance of that, we send this temporary agreement to place for many years.
Is this where they had landscaping and everything in, and then,
Yeah, this was into a loop system, that's why we kept things, we cut down on flushing. And then a long time ago, this was going gangbusters down there, and they put a pump station in, and we basically made them rebuild the pump station, put a new force main and stuff in recently, when they did it.
We wanted part of the system for water quality, they
Right.
wanted part of it to keep the people out. And so we had this hybrid agreement that has to now go away.
okay. Well, I'll move for acceptance.
Second?
Okay, we got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0.
Might wanna, I know there's not any public out there, but you might wanna,
Oh,
next time.
thank you, Jeff. Do we have any public comment on this, on agenda item number 5?
Now that we already voted for it?
Anyone want to chime in? Right. Okay, item 5B. Thank you, Bill. Review and acceptance of the fiscal year 2013-2014 second quarter investment report. Lynn Gentry.
Good morning.
Morning.
For the last 3 months of 2013, which was the second quarter of fiscal year 13-14, there was very little activity from an investment standpoint. We have an increase in cash balances of a little over $1 million, but that was predominantly because of the proceeds from the bond for Pine Acres. So it's not really our cash, but we're holding on to it for construction. There was investment earnings of about $38,000 posted for that quarter. We had a bond mature that was reinvested in Cedars account and Lake, about $1 million each. And we had a distribution from the Lehman Brothers defaulted bond of $82,000. That brings our total recovery on that defaulted bond to $296,000. The market value on the bond at the end of last year was $300,000, so we could feasibly receive another $300,000 in the future. I don't have any information as to when that's going to happen. It just shows up. We don't ever get a notice. Just as a little bit of history, we purchased that bond in May of 2008. It defaulted in September 2008. And we have to receive no interest earnings on that bond whatsoever. As far as our economic outlook and what we can expect for investments for the balance of this fiscal year and calendar year, you may have heard Janet Yellen yesterday in her comments that she intends to keep interest rates low for a long time. Any questions?
Lynn, on the bond investment, on the third column, the change in the bond investments, the negative 2 million, I think you spoke on that a little bit. Can you?
That means we had a bond that matured. So rather than the bond investments being 6.5 million, one of the bonds matured, we received proceeds. That's why there was a negative change there. So our bond investments went down by 2 million. We invested some of that in Lake, $1 million, and some of it into Cedars account. So you'll see that the Lake balances went up and the Cedars balances went up.
Okay, thank you.
With Yellen's remarks, do you anticipate looking less at bonds and more in other directions into the future, or do you see bonds just being static?
Bonds are still not paying anything worth looking at. And we check the market whenever we have a maturity. We had a maturity, I believe, last week, and we were looking at 40 basis points, hardly worth the trouble. So we're staying liquid right now, keeping most of our investments in either Cedars accounts or the Lake or money market.
And I really support that. I mean, I realize bonds are not, gambling at Tahoe, but I also recognize it's one of those kind of things, if they're not giving you any money, why would you have absolutely any risk?
Why tie it up?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. Moving on, Any public comment on 5B? Okay, close public comment. 5C, discussion action regarding commencement of proceedings to finance water and wastewater projects and approving agreements with Southwest Securities and Weiss Law Firm. Jeffrey Meyer.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. The item before you today is a continuation of conversations we've had since early last year regarding the rate study. As you remember, when your board adopted the rate study, the increases were dedicated towards a capital renovation and replacement program, or we refer to it as a capital R&R program. So all the funds that we collect, the new revenues, are dedicated towards this process of replacing water and sewer infrastructure. When we discussed this rate increase, one of the things we brought to everybody's attention is the rates that we approved did not provide enough funding in itself to fund these projects that we've identified during the next 5 years. In fact, as the rates are increased, they're stepped increased over the next 3 years, we identified the need to pre-fund some of the projects. In other words, get some funding up front to help jumpstart these projects. And the process was to look towards a short-term loan versus long-term bonds. Traditionally, if you're looking at infrastructure that lasts 50 years, you get a 50-year bond, or a 30-year or a 25-year long-term bonds. However, the bond market itself right now, the rates are not competitive with the short-term loan rates that are available to us. Plus, your board had directed us to look at the shorter term so that we don't create a long-term obligation within the district. We want to pay this off fairly quickly. So staff has been looking at our options, and we are utilizing the same team that we utilized when we refinanced our 2004 revenue refunding bonds. That is Southwest Securities and the Weiss Law Firm. If you remember correctly, back in last spring, when we refinanced these, we got very good rates for our refinancing process. And this was done through an RFP process through banks. The banks are looking towards filling their portfolio with, say, 5 to 7 year loans. We're right within their windows. We cannot do this on our own. We need legal expertise. We need a placement agent to be able to work with these banks. And these two firms have significant experience and a great track record in this process. Before you today is we're requesting authorization for the district to contract out with Southwest Securities and with the Weiss Law Firm to go forward with these loans. We're looking at about $2.3 million, $2.4 million on the sewer side, and about $4.2 million on the water side. The reasons the numbers are a little bit higher is we want cost issuance included in the price of the debt that we're going to get. So there's no upfront out-of-pocket money on the district's part. We have increased the loan portion on the water side to be able to accommodate what we're looking at is a little bit higher costs associated with the REACH 3A transmission line replacement program up in the past area. This is going to be about a $5 million project. It's a little more expensive. Some of the issues that have cropped up as far as location of the pipe and actual construction have driven up those cost estimates. So we want to make sure we have adequate funding. And the rates environment right now is still quite low. They're looking at maybe 2.25 to 2.5, probably 2.5% at this particular point on these issues, which is extremely good. Yeah, we're not going to get the 1.58 that we got a year ago today, but nobody's going to get that. We just happen to hit the market in the sweet spot at that particular point. So what we're looking at today is a resolution authorizing us to sign agreements with the Weiss Law Firm and with Southwest Securities. We're looking at, between the two of them, about $82,000 in costs associated with the issuance of this debt. We have to have separate water and wastewater debts, and that's why it's a little bit more, a little bit higher than it would be if it's a single issue, but the issuers want to make sure we separate them because we have separate revenue streams. And I'm available for any questions at this time.
But Jeff?
You said, I'm glad you brought up that number, 82,000 is what we anticipate paying for their services?
Yes, combined,
And how much was the total debt?
6.3 million.
And so is that proportionate? Is that an industry standard? Is it, because here in this, in the description, it says, you know, and shall be paid a portion of the proceedings of financial obligations. Is there a limit? I mean, how did that 82,000 come about?
That's a fixed fee from them based on their general fees for doing services of this process, and it is very competitive. Southwest Securities is.
Well, I have complete faith in it. It's just, when I read this, I mean, it's good to see the number associated with it, but I'm just, where in the contract is the number tied to anything? Is it
It's a fixed
a
fee.
percentage?
No, it's a couple elements that are fixed fee within, for the services being delivered. So it's pretty much like a standard estimate we give for any piece of work.
So that's a not to exceed number?
Yes.
Okay.
But it won't be any less.
I'm curious, is there upper limits? Is this tied to our rates? I mean, we've identified this number in terms of what we're going to borrow. Is that the maximum that we could borrow, or is that the smart thing to borrow at this point? Is there any limitations in terms of how you came up to these numbers?
There are limitations to how much we can borrow, and it comes down to, one simple way is our debt service coverage.
Right.
Banks require us to have a debt service coverage of about 125, and we've discussed that in the past. One of the things we have to do is ensure that not only is there coverage for this issue within 125, for any previous issues that's on a par level stays at the 125. So we're looking at that. We're looking at the cost of issuance and when we need the money. And we can probably bond for a little bit more on the water side, but we don't need that money right away, so we just be sitting on it. So there's a number of factors in play here. We're also looking at providing flexibility once this debt service is paid off. So there are a number of issues, and you're right on. But what we're looking at is what is our need, what will our rates be able to cover as far as debt service, and when those new rates come up to their 3-year level, what revenues will we be having at that point to fund our projects?
And a key component is also demonstrating that financial management forward for your next issuance.
Right.
We may actually sometimes dip below your covenant level of the ratio of 1.25, not necessarily the biggest issue in the world if you demonstrate consistency and a willingness to put in rates in order to make sure that you're on track to stay above the 1.25.
Yeah, and that's basically the context of my question. I guess the other part
Ratio is the
is
factor.
how much you guys are doing the projects in terms of what you see as priority, but is after this issuance, what we intend to accomplish, do we have another huge project online, or is it 3 small projects and then a big project and then a huge project? And I know you have no crystal ball, but I know that you guys are looking at these things. I'm just wondering if we're staying ahead of it a little bit in terms of not getting caught short.
I want to come back to a point that Richard made. What we're looking at here is financial management, making sure we have adequate resources, and for future issuance, future dealings with banks and financial institutions, even when we go out to get grants, when you get grants and even loans, they look at your financial management to making sure, yes, even if we get the grants we got from Prop 84 or from some of the states, they want to make sure we have adequate rate coverage, believe it or not.
For free money?
So it's an all-encompassing outlook. Now, to your next question, do we have revenues necessary or adequate to cover our projected costs on these capital R&R programs? We don't have enough revenue because our to-do list is extremely high.
Right.
However, we realize that and are staging projects accordingly so that you gave us rate revenues. That is what we're going to be working within. We have other projects that are going to be future projects, other water transmission projects, transmission main replacements, tank management programs, other things we're looking at. We're going to look at that cash stream that we're going to get for future. Try to go out and be very aggressive in getting grants and other programs to facilitate it and to do the best we can within the limitations of those rates, within the constraints of what can we actually construct and design and construct over that 5-year period. So there's all those limitations. We could always use more money, but we want to have that flexibility, and we don't want to overtax or overburden our financial management system.
One of the overlaying filters that we put on this is also certain projects lend themselves for more grant opportunity than others. And so currently there's a striking emphasis on some projects that might actually save water or avoid lost water. And so moving some of those as fast as we can may be advantageous. Certainly our disadvantaged community work is much more inclined to be receiving grants. And so Jeff has created some elaborate spreadsheets to take into consideration some of that. And we've got more in design now, starting, and we can actually execute deliberately, because once it's designed, then we can really tell you with much more accuracy what these things are going to cost for the program.
I guess, you know, the other aspect of that question for me is in the next 20 years, do we go out 4 times at $88,000 or 3 times at $88,000? You know, that's probably another way of looking at it.
Oh, for the cost of issuance versus how many times we actually go out and create debt.
Right.
And
And I'm not trying to tie you down. This is crystal ball stuff. I'm just trying to get a feel for what you guys are thinking in this regard.
Director Dean?
No one anticipated 1.58 interest rates, and I think everybody would recognize that we should be dipping into that as much as we possibly can, whenever we can. So that dynamic is changing. I think it's a great policy discussion to talk about your board's comfort level with assuming a lot of debt, having your debt modulated, and then seeing how you pledge things back to who is actually going to be obligated to pay it. Did we reach the right generational equity and the people that are actually consuming the services and infrastructure at the right time? So,
I agree. That would be a great discussion. Yeah.
Okay, question I have is, when we were originally talking about going out for debt, it was about a third of what you're proposing here. Am I to assume, based on that, that we're going to be starting a lot of projects simultaneously as opposed to doing them incrementally like it was originally proposed?
actually, when the original proposal was $3.6 million of debt, 2.3 on the wastewater side, 1.3 on the water side.
But the revision came after we reduced the rate for wastewater, and I think it came out to under 2 million.
No, actually,
Okay.
it remained the same.
All right, so it's twice as much instead of 3 times. But the question I have is we're out there borrowing the $6 whatever million, and is that going to then simultaneously fund a number of projects as opposed to the incremental process that we were going to be developing? Because originally, with the rate increase, we were going to initially fund projects up front with debt, and then as we gathered more money in from the rate payments, and that increased revenue would then allow us to fund directly from the revenue instead of borrowing money. And I agree, 1.58, no, not what, even 2.5% is pretty doggone cheap, and the sooner we can get some of these things done, the better it's going to be for everybody. But am I seeing here a little change in philosophy, or what?
It's the same philosophy, what we're looking at when we're looking at pre-funding, getting funds available to fund some of the projects. The biggest change here is the price tag on Reach 3A and some of these pipeline projects that we're looking at needing to fund.
No, I understand that part of it, because that was a surprise.
And as soon as and we're looking at, if I'm not mistaken, at some point this year to start construction on that project. So.
Well, it had originally been proposed to do that in phases. Are we now just going to do the whole thing?
No, you're still going to have pieces of it. You're talking about over 18,000 linear feet of pipeline. So your construction window alone would be difficult to get that into a single season without massive disruption of the community up there. So you still have the incremental approach. We're designing the whole thing at once, and then we'll break it out into which pieces are more naturally broken out because they're either more achievable because we can get through cash flow processes or not, or they're more achievable because we haven't shut down the whole town because we have to approach water replacement in certain places differently than we have in other places. So it's going to be very much an incremental process. It's just a big project.
Okay.
Reach goes from below Forest Meadows up to Miko.
Yeah.
So it's huge.
I know it's huge, and just by virtue of the fact that it is that big, you're obviously going to have to do it in increments anyhow. So we're still looking at 5 to 7 year on the loans. Okay.
I'm sorry.
5 to 7 years on the loan, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Okay, Director Dooley?
I assume that the banks and all the lending institutions are going to require us to hire these consultants to push this thing through. Since we're going to the private, is there any chance of bypassing those consultants and doing everything in-house?
Putting together a loan package like this requires two things. One is to be able to put together a financing package and market it to the lending institutions. That's what Southwest Securities is going to do. They're looking at all our financials, all our debt coverage, all the different scenarios, putting together this package and sending it out to people, to banks that they've had relationships with in the past. They know who's selling, who's buying, and who's not, or who's issuing debt and who's not. Who's issuing debt in this price range, or this price range, and also this time frame. So they have the connections and they have the ability. Their skills and expertise will get us better rates than what we could do on our own. As far as the legal side, we have to have a set of legal documents with these banks for both loans, the water and the wastewater side. We don't have that legal expertise in-house who deals with loans on a day-to-day basis in-house. We could contract out with Downey Brand to do that, and I'm sure they'd love to get the business, but I don't think that's their expertise. So in the long run, we're saving money. We need to have that legal representation to look out for the districts, on the district's behalf, of our best interest. So these are services that we do. In the short answer, we need these services.
Well, I
We
just,
don't have them in-house.
I rather assume so, but I like to hear you justify why we have to spend this money.
Yes. And one more point of this is, once we go through this process, and Southwest Security is basically finalizing their RFP package to go out to the lending institutions for bank qualified loans, any loan will come back to your board for approval. This does not give you, you're not giving authorization to Mitch and myself to sign all these loan documents and take out debt. We will be coming back to you once that RFP process has been completed, we've got the bids and we found the best deal out there. So your board will have a second review of this process and approving the debt itself.
What kind of a response do they anticipate for the RFP? 3 banks, 10 banks, 40 banks?
I'd say within probably no less than 5, maybe a little bit more. This is early in the year. Banks are trying to build up their portfolio. I've had some initial conversations with some banks, and this 5 to 7 year loan is in their sweet spot because banks have to have a certain portion of their loan portfolio in the short term, mid-term, and long term. And this is what their marketing departments have told them. We need to focus on this time frame, 5 to 7 years. So we're right in the sweet spot, and I think we're going to do well.
Okay, well, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the agreements with Southwest Securities and Weiss Law Firm to commence proceedings to finance water and wastewater projects.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any public comment on this item? Go ahead, Ken.
Just a question, I didn't get the numbers, the breakdown between water and...
Ken, can you come to the microphone? Thank you.
Just, I didn't hear the breakdown between the water, the total was 6.3, but what was the breakdown between water and sewer?
In the agenda package, on the second page, we're looking at approximately $2.4 million for wastewater projects and $4.2 million for water-related projects, and that includes the cost of approximate numbers, and that includes the cost of issuance.
Can
The final numbers we're going to get at all when said and done is 2.3 on the sewer side, wastewater side, and 4 million on the water side.
And that's just subtracting out the 83K for the charges?
Yeah, and
Okay.
there's going to be bank charges and cost of issuance on their side, but these are probably high estimates, but I just gave approximate numbers.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Why isn't the choice of the consultants doing this work for us not going out for bid?
You done?
We went out for bid previously when we did the refinancing of the 2004 revenue refunding bond. And we looked at the cost at that particular point in time and the results of it. And I did somewhat of an informal review just to go out and kind of verify costs. And we had good experience, and these are right within our ballpark. So I feel confident in these two consultants. Plus, Weiss Law Firm has been our bond counsel for some time.
Well, I'm not advocating doing anything different, but I'm trying to make sure that it's justified doing it the way we're doing it.
Yeah.
I do have one last thing, and it's, I don't know if I'm concerned or confused as to the wording of Section 3 and Section 5. And it's just it's a long sentence. The president, vice president, general manager, finance director, director of administrative services, clerk to the board, and directors of any other person authorized by the board to act on behalf of the district shall each be an authorized representative of the district for purposes of doing a whole bunch of things. What is this? And Section 5 reads very similar to it.
This is legalese. That means if in particular some person is not available to sign the appropriate documentation, your authorization is to make sure that somebody is here to sign on that particular day. If for some unforeseen circumstance, whereas the vice president, the president, the general manager, or such is not available, then that person, the next person can be able to be signing the documents. And that's what
Really?
It's the Al Haig rule.
He's in charge. Okay. All right, we got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Excuse me, President Redmond, but you did not have a motion, or there needs to be a motion on back to 5B. There was a motion to accept.
I also move on 5B.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We're done with 5C now, right? Okay, we have a motion and a second on 5B. Review and acceptance of the fiscal year 2013-2014 second quarter investment report, which was just presented by Lynn Gentry. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0 as well. Moving on to 5D, discussion action regarding authorizing contract services for district engineer.
I'll lead on that one. Ultimately, going back to last year's budget time, we had anticipated needing someone serving the role of district engineer. We didn't fund the position as a full-time position. We funded it as basically half and half worth money. My target audience at that point was to hopefully have found a retired district engineer from another agency that would be available for some work to assist us. As the year advanced, it didn't happen quite the way we anticipated.